best way to reach me is to email, call me, text me. If I can't respond, I'll usually let you know that I'll call you as soon as I can.
And I'm Renee Dillon, one of the owners of Organic PC. My contact info is up there as well. That's my cell phone number, great for texting. CloseKW@organicpc.com is a great email to have if you don't already have that. It goes to myself and all of my staff. So you will usually get a really quick response from that one versus just trying to get in touch with me directly.
The forms, Renee and I didn't have time to communicate with one another, so we're kind of all over the board. So some of the forms you have, we're not going to go over. Some of them we are. This one Renee didn't know we were going to do.
Surprise!
All right, but this form, the property sold with right to request repairs. When it's a seller's market, we see this form come up a lot versus due diligence. Because buyer's agents are trying to get the house when they're in a multiple offer situation. So they will suggest doing this versus due diligence. Due diligence being that you can terminate for any reason or no reason, which is great. We hate this form, but it's there and it's being used. So I just want you to be aware of it, but more importantly, paragraph 1 and 2. I see this mistake made because I review all the contracts for this office and another office. In paragraph 1, example, within 7 days from binding agreement date, buyer will get their inspection. In paragraph 2, then it should be like 10 days. Instead, I'm seeing someone put 3 days. Does that make sense? Because it's from binding agreement date. So if you put 3 in there, you're in trouble. Your buyer's in trouble. So it's always a lower number in 1, a higher number in 2. And go up just a little bit, Diane. And then read 5B about defects. This came up yesterday on a question. Someone said, well, if the house has polybutylene pipe, whatever, can my buyer get out if the seller won't replace it? And the answer is, if the seller disclosed that they have poly, then no, they can't. So if it's a known defect and it's been disclosed on the property disclosure, buyer can then not come back and say, well, if you won't fix this, we're going to terminate. So know what a defect is. Read that paragraph.
And one of the reasons we hate this form is, despite the fact that the form does lay out what a defect is,
This is what
everyone still ends up arguing over, is this a defect, is this not? This form just tends to bring up more confusion and
but if you're going to use it, know how to use it.
If you're going to use it, know how to use it. And know too, because I think especially this used to be part of the contract back in the day.
It's the way we used to do it. There was no due diligence.
People that have been in the business, they know how to use it, but for newer agents, sometimes it's confusing. And the big difference is you have to negotiate out the defects. You can't just terminate because you want to. That's the big difference between due diligence and this. Like, you have to negotiate out the defects. The contract may still terminate if you can't agree on what to fix, what defects, what are the defects, and what needs to be fixed. But it's not that same get out of jail free card. You have to go through the negotiation process, which we have seen a lot of. I saw just this week, we saw contracts properties that went under contract. They went in and discovered there was way more deferred maintenance on the property than they thought. There's a lot of problems. We've seen a lot of quick terminations. So you don't get that option with this. You go in, and if the property is in way worse condition than you initially thought it would be, you still got to negotiate it out with the seller. Any questions on that one? Other than we don't like it, then we try not to do that.
Can I say a quick word?
Mhm.
We have about 4 people in here that are brand new agents
Okay.
that don't know anything.
Okay.
And I know you're gonna feel a little lost. Just pick up what you can and we'll cover it all in Ignite. But, we have a real mixed group here today.
Okay.
We
And
have some
well,
Ignite graduates,
Feel
we
free
have
to
some not
feel free
yet.
to jump in and ask any questions.
And one thing that is in your packet on the very front is a list of every form that's available. So you don't need to recreate, and they've now broken it into sections, so it's easy to find. So when you need an amendment, there's a list of 8 different amendments. If you need financing, same thing, they're all listed there.
Yeah, get familiar with the
Yes.
forms and what they do, because there's really a form for just about everything that you need.
Now, I had an agent call yesterday and said, do I need to write a special stip because my buyer has to sell their house? Or my seller needs to sell their house before they can buy a house. There's a form. You don't need to be writing special steps. So know what the forms are. I just want you to be aware of the form. I don't know if it needs a whole lot of explanation unless you have questions on it.
Yeah, this one, I feel like a lot of people get tripped up on the kick-out provision on this one.
Now, if you're
So-
representing the buyer, I recommend that you ignore paragraph D
Yeah,
and let a seller counter if they want to.
yeah.
That's what I teach.
All right, but if there is a kick out, for instance, if it's seller, buyer shall have 48 hours after receipt of notice that seller's got another offer. And it doesn't have to be an accepted offer, it's just an offer. They give your buyer notice, you've got to remove all contingencies. Due diligence, financing, appraisal, the sale of their current home, every contingency in favor of the buyer. So that's why you hope you can get away without having a kick out.
Do you mind repeating that? 'Cause I just actually got involved with that.
The kick-out provision. So if the seller gets another offer, and like Lynn said, it doesn't have to be an accepted offer, it's just if they get another offer, buyer shall have, it's generally 48 hours, I think is what most people put in there, to amend the agreement that gets rid of all the contingencies. Not just this one, but all the
Everything.
contingencies, due diligence, financing,
Appraisal.
appraisal, all of it. So, I mean, this one trips people up a lot because they don't realize that it just wipes everything out if that kick-out provision goes into play.
Yep.
And like Lynn said, if you're doing this, if you're representing the buyer and you're filling this form out, don't initial out D if at all
Just
possible.
ignore number D if you can.
Because a lot of agents, I mean, sad to say, they're not going to pick up on the fact that it wasn't initialed.
Which means when you're in .loop, you need, because it's going to default to the buyer sign there and their initials, so you got to assign it to no one.
Right.
Assign it to no one, or your buyer might accidentally sign it.
Yeah, which they do a lot, yeah.
And
That's a good point.
so if you're representing the seller and the buyer's agent's done a good job on there for their buyer, they came in and said, hey, we're already under contract, past due diligence, we're in financing, contingency's got another few days on that. You're better off just,
Not doing a kick out.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't mess with the kick out.
Yeah.
You know, I see the kick out more when a buyer's house has just gone on the market and it's not even under contract yet. That's when I'll see a seller do a kick out, invoke a kick out.
And when we're working with buyers, you just want to be very careful. Like, hey, wait a minute here. We can't, you're going to be really in the pickle if you
Yeah.
accept this kick out, because you're going to have to terminate, basically.
Well,
And-
and they'd have to
You have to terminate,
because,
because if you just.
and they may have already done their home inspection and spent several $100s. They may have already ordered the appraisal and spent several $100s. If they don't remove all the contingencies, then they're just out of pocket.
And this, I mean, to your point, you just really got to communicate with your buyer. Hopefully you're also doing their listing, so you have an idea of, you know, what kind of shape their property is in. You know, if you were in team meeting, there was a lot of talk about, you know, about the condition of the property and how to talk to your sellers about it. You know, if they're going under contract and their property is not ready to be listed at all, it's cluttered up, hasn't been staged, you know, they haven't done any of the preliminary kind of repair on some of the deferred maintenance stuff, just, you know, you just need to communicate with them, like, look, that your property may not go as quickly as you would hope. So do we really want to get ourselves into this?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing worse than a buyer finding a house they want and find out they can't get it.
Yeah.
That's a horrible feeling for them. So.
And also, just as an aside, just in general, I feel like buyers, I mean, and sellers, they're not always real truthful about their financial situations. So, you know, they may say like, hey, no, we're fine. Like, if push comes to shove, we can come up with money and it's not a big deal. But a lot of times that's not the case. You may want to, that's when you also may want to have a conversation with their lender and find out, you know, is this going to be a contingency that they have to sell the other house before they can purchase the new one?
Because a lot of times buyers would want to be able to not have to sell. I mean, they'd rather sell their house and get the equity. But I had one last week where he qualified for both houses, but at the last minute, and his house was under contract. At the last minute, the buyer terminated on his first house, and he had to go take money out of 401ks or whatever, but it delayed the closing, and the seller almost terminated on him.
Yeah, and we see, I mean, we do a lot of closings where it's a funding requirement, it's a underwriting requirement that they have to see the proof of sale from the previous property before they'll finalize the loan. So,
and one last thing, C, in the event that the contingency period ends without any contingency referenced above being fulfilled, this agreement shall terminate. This is important because under B, if this agreement is contingent upon the occurrence of the following on or before, which is normally buyer closing on the sale of other property, if you don't, it's always
if they're delayed.
If they're delayed, say it's supposed to be April 15th, and it gets delayed, and it ends up being 8 days later, technically the contract terminates.
if they don't.
So
give
what's the
notice.
remedy?
You do an amendment.
You do an amendment that
When
gives
you extend the
notice.
closing date, you also extend the contingency.
Aha.
Okay.
And if their current house closes before the closing date on the second house, when that house closes, you want to remove that contingency. Because again, if that date is in there and it passes, technically, legally, I guess, not many people pick up on that, but stranger things have happened.
But, you know, but they can, you know.
It's never a problem till it's a problem.
One more time?
Exactly.
So if you,
If you're going past this date, the date that you're putting here, and they still haven't
B.
sold their house, so like so your buyer's sale gets delayed
right,
a week. You need to amend the closing date on their purchase, but also amend this,
The contingency.
amend the contingency to extend the date out to the new day of closing. Because otherwise the contract can just terminate.
okay.
And again, most people A, don't pick up on it, or don't remember that that's even in here.
Yeah, it's not in bold print,
But
thank goodness.
like most of the things that we tell you about regarding the contract, it's not a problem until it is. It's not a problem until somebody wants to get out of the contract.
Yep. All right. What else did we have? This is another backup exhibits. We're seeing a lot of backups right now. I don't know.
No, not everybody knows.
Okay. Your buyer finds a house, they fall in love with it, but it's already under contract. You have the option to submit a backup agreement. And the seller doesn't have to do it, but they, most of them will, they'll take a backup. So when you make your offer to the seller, you're going to attach the backup agreement contingency, which basically means that your buyer's in secondary position. They don't have to start their due diligence or their financing or their appraisal until they're in primary position. And that requires written notice from the seller.
So if there's one under contract with a kickout, and you get a backup, when does it kick it? It kicks out the, it knocks out the,
No, you wouldn't have normally both of them together, or I haven't seen.
well,
No.
that happened last week.
If you represent the seller?
No, it was the buyer, the ones that I was showing for Becky. So there was one under contract with a kickout, but their house wasn't even under contract yet.
Okay,
So,
not your contract, someone else's.
right,
Okay.
the buyer of said property,
Mhm.
their house was not under contract yet.
Okay.
So, but they had a contract on seller's property with a kickout.
With a kick out, okay.
But the agent was still wanting everyone to see so that she could get a backup.
Uh-huh.
And then when the backup came in, then
They use the
those
kickouts to
buyers
knock
had
out.
X length of time.
Yeah.
To either remove all contingencies or
Or-
terminate.
Right.
Okay.
Or terminate, and if they terminate, then they
Then
can notify
you
you
could get
that this
written
is.
notice that you're in primary
And their
position.
agent kept going and changing it in FMLS to contingent. So,
Well, that's all.
trying to
that's all
save it for
different.
their buyer.
Yeah.
And you will, in a market like this, you're gonna see a
Yeah.
lot of
That's why I wanted to go over some of these. 'cause
interesting
I'm seeing
things
too
out there.
many. Yeah.
Um,
And then your buyer can terminate anytime. If you're in a backup, your buyer can terminate anytime.
Just withdraw the offer.
Just, well, it's a binding agreement, so you still have to
You just do it.
terminate.
Yeah,
Terminate.
terminate, yeah.
But while
If
they're
you're
in secondary
binding, you're
position.
just in secondary position.
and they can unilaterally terminate it.
Okay. Any questions on that? What else do we have? If you guys have questions about a certain form or amendment or exhibit, speak up, please. No, I don't know what this is.
Okay. No financial.
Do we
What
have?
about FHA? I got one.
No,
No, we're not doing
We did those
that.
we're
last
doing
time.
Oh,
No,
never
No,
mind.
finance
I
conventions.
withdraw that question.
we didn't. Do you wanna do, where's the HOA one?
That's the community association, we didn't pull that one, but we can.
What does that one say?
And then we
Is it
did-
not in the packet, or is it?
No,
We got it.
what? No, that's the all cash, the community association. This is Renee's favorite
This is my
form in the
favorite
whole
form.
world.
The worst form, one that causes the most problems. They have tried and tried and tried to, this one I feel like has changed, every 6 months or every year.
Sorry, I don't have that one.
The management companies are charging
don't have
an
it.
exorbitant amount of fees these days. And a lot of sellers are clueless as to changes that have been made to initiation fees, transfer fees, etc. So, two big things to remember on this one. Can you go to the second
Second page.
page? Yeah.
Here we are.
Okay, so so I'll
Diane,
start.
can you enlarge, please?
I'll start with B up at the top.
I
So,
don't have this one, sorry.
Thank you.
seller has to pay the account statement letter, or what we call the HOA letter, clearance letter, whatever. Seller has to pay for it. There are virtually no attorneys in town that front the money for this, which means your seller is actually having to call in and put their credit card in and pay for this letter to get it sent to our office. We can't close without it. And they're expensive. I mean, they're usually, you know, 250, we've seen from 150 to you know, 275 on average. Now, the reason why this is so important is all the management companies give a timeline of 5 to 10 business days to get us the letter. So a lot of sellers, they don't want to pay for it during due diligence until due diligence has expired. But if you have a really short time period from due diligence to closing, you're going to run into trouble getting this HOA letter. This is the thing that we are most often waiting for prior to closing. Most of them will allow you to pay a rush fee to get it faster. That's usually 3 to 5 business days. It's still not an overnight turnaround kind of thing. And the rush fee can be anywhere from $75 to $150. So you need to just communicate with your seller. Even if they, you know, if you were in one of those short time frames from the end of due diligence to closing, they need to go ahead and get this letter ordered. Even if this contract doesn't close, that letter will still be available. They won't have to purchase a new one. Condos are a little different. If it doesn't close within 30 days, it has to be updated because they almost always have monthly fees. But for the most part, you're going to be able to.
But isn't the update fee less than the rush fee?
The update fee is usually like $75, maybe $50 to $75.
Yeah. But when we listed our house, the first thing I did was order the letter. I had it. I mean, and if you know your house is going to sell, why not? Why wait till the last minute and pay extra money because you forgot?
So you've got to tell your seller in the listing presentation, you're going to be paying for this. Don't make it a surprise.
And then go to the.
All right.
So question for you, just how far in advance can you order it and how long is it good for? Because I heard 2 things. Condo, you might have to get an
she
update.
just changes.
Condos, because they you know, every month they owe fees, so we have to make sure that, I mean, those are usually at 30 days.
Okay.
Most residentials are quarterly or even yearly.
Annual, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
if it's
mean-
annual, then you just probably just need to order it once, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the other big one
Next
here,
page,
no, 4A. So if fee, transfer and initiation fees, if the fee is not accurately disclosed or left blank, which we have seen them left blank, seller shall pay the difference between what was disclosed and the actual fee owing. This is still, I mean,
It's still the biggest issue.
It's still the biggest issue. We have at least one closing per month where they are arguing about this. Seller's mad because they have to pay. They didn't find out ahead of time what the initiation or transfer fee was. You know, when you take the listing, make them call, make them find out ahead of time what these fees are going to be.
Don't let them leave it blank.
And don't let them leave it blank. They tried. We had a closing not too long ago where they left it blank and tried to say that, you know, that the seller wasn't responsible for it because.
But if you go to page 3, it's going to clearly say seller warrants, warranty number 5.
Yep.
Seller warrants that he has filled this out and fully disclosed all the fees, and that's what is going to rule. So if he left it blank or, you know, guessed at the amount and it's higher, seller is going to owe it.
And if you are representing a buyer, make sure that you are using this current form.
Yes.
We see all the time people sneaking in a 2014 version of this form where there's no buyer protection in. It has nothing, absolutely nothing in there. And I mean, John, I think you had the closing where, I mean, it's the standoff. The seller didn't even want to show up because,
that was because he just, it was last year, they disclosed that there was an outstanding balance because he was paying over time.
Yeah, that was over
In
the
there,
special
okay.
assessments, yeah.
And then, so we knew it.
Yeah.
But then when it came back through it, the way the law works, he has to settle it before.
Yeah.
Right.
So what happened is
Yeah.
that they weren't going to come to closing. Now, obviously, we could have,
Yeah.
and we were actually letting the guy stay over.
Yeah.
Okay, which, like, okay, great.
Yeah,
They
that was a
really
crazy
got us over our
situation,
barrel.
but
Now
that-
you can be a jerk, and then
Yeah.
next thing you know, you tear the place up, and we got another issue.
Right. So aside from the 2 big issues there, the special assessments also tend to, I don't even know where it's on in here, but the special assessments also tend to cause a lot of problems. A lot of the condos, townhomes, they will do, they have a big project come up. They need to re-roof the whole thing, so they do a one-time special assessment. Those are due at the time that they're passed. So, a couple years ago, one of them passed like 2 weeks before closing, and the seller got stuck with it. And they were hoping to pass it on to the buyer. But talk to your seller about these. A lot of times what they do is they give the seller an option of a payment plan. If it's a $5,000 special assessment, on a $150,000 condo, they're not going to make them pay the lump sum $5,000. They're going to give them the option to pay it in installments. Even though they haven't paid it, even some of those installments have not been, even though the installments themselves are not due, it's still the seller's responsibility to pay it. So if they haven't done it, you need to talk to your seller and make sure that they fully understand the deal with their special assessments. Now, just to throw an even bigger monkey wrench into this, occasionally they will do, instead of increasing the dues, they will do a long-term special assessment that is due on, it's like an additional fee, which is different really than a special assessment. So you got to just talk to your sellers and really drill down and figure out.
So what you're saying is when you finally see one of those comes through and says, oh, we're going to increase the dues $100 a month for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
That's not the same.
That's not the same thing as a special
as a
assessment.
special assessment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And generally, when we get the letters over, the letters are really, the management companies are very clear with, who owes what. They'll say that the seller still has an outstanding balance for the special assessment of, X amount. But, most of the time, if a special assessment is passed, it's going to be the instance where the seller's going to owe all the money. So just talk to them about that and make sure that they're aware that they are going to have to pay the rest of those. A lot of sellers don't understand, they're like, the buyer's getting the benefit of it, why am I having to pay for it?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, once it's passed, it's due by the seller.
So, just a question for you. So, if there is, say, for example, an assessment on certain neighbors, just give me an example. So, in a subdivision, there is a lake, and the people who live around the lake have responsibility for maintaining the lake as a part of their homeowner association.
Yeah.
If they sue, say, for example, the neighborhood to be assessed across the entire neighborhood, how do you share or basically communicate that as a part of your, and who's responsible for the payment if it gets settled?
There is a section here for litigation
litigation.
and violations. If
Okay.
there is any pending litigation, and it does happen. Again, it's once it's settled. I mean, it's whenever it comes due. So if something happens, if there's litigation pending, you close, 6 months later, it gets settled, and these people are now responsible for additional money. The buyer's going to be on the hook for it because it occurred after the sale.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
So this is a heads up. This is
Yep.
so
But
that the
litigation, you
buyers-
would have to let somebody know that there's potential litigation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And on page 3, there's room there if it's something different, but really you think the seller might need to disclose, do it.
Are there cases where if there is litigation you couldn't close, that couldn't clear title?
On some
It
condos, I've
depends.
seen it, but.
Condos, because sometimes then it throws the condo questionnaire off
Right.
for financing purposes.
Possible.
I can't remember a time where we haven't closed because of something going on with the master association. Because it's generally, it's not a lawsuit that the people are personally involved in. It's usually, I mean, honestly, I'm trying to think of a time where it's held up, and I can't think of the time.
So no. All right.
So generally, no. I mean, unless the association is suing individual members, then that holds it up.
Back to the transfer and initiation fees, how long do the sellers have to disclose?
Oh, good question.
Just until,
Good question. As soon as they fill this out,
Yeah.
they don't get the opportunity to change it. That was a change that was made at the beginning of year or January,
Yeah.
I think.
Cause this form has changed so much in the
Well,
last.
It
Yeah.
has changed, and that's, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that
Cause
a lot
I
of
think
people
it
aren't
said
aware
it had
of.
until closing in one of the versions in the last.
It did,
Okay.
Yeah.
it did, but what was happening is, it just said they had to update the form if there was a change. It didn't relieve them of the obligation, the seller of the obligation, if they didn't have it right the first time.
If you don't have it under contract and you've got it on the market and the seller has identified that there was a mistake
change.
made, they can make the change then and you're fine.
Yeah, if you're not
Yeah.
under
As long as you're not
contract.
under
Yeah.
contract.
Once you're
you
under
can do whatever you
contract,
want,
all
but
that's
once you
wrong.
go on a contract, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You know, as soon as
Yeah.
I put this in FMLS, it's there until I
Yeah.
pull it off.
yeah, because you can take it off and just, and
We
put a
can
new
do
one
it.
on.
So if you are under contract and you find out that something you did put something wrong, do you make an amendment? How does that work?
I mean, if you're under contract and they disclose it incorrectly, the seller's stuck paying the difference. You can't.
Unless the
can't-
buyer
What
would
if it's,
agree.
Unless
what
the
if it's
buyer agrees.
lower?
Unless the buyer agrees, but I mean, if I was a buyer, I wouldn't agree.
What if you made a mistake that's lower and then you find out that it's more? Like, for instance, you say that it's an initiation fee of $1,000 and you figure out that it's $1,500 afterwards.
Seller is paying
Seller's gonna
500
own
of
it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I had a situation where they were previously charging $400 initiation fee. He called and asked the management company said, oh, we're not doing that anymore. I said, well, okay, you're on the hook if that's right. If
And
they
get,
tell you
and get
wrong,
that in writing,
well,
because.
we
Yeah.
just put the 400 in there.
Yeah.
And if the
Yeah.
agent asked me, I said, hey, you may not have to pay that, but we'll have to
Yeah.
find
But you're
out.
better off
You're better off knowing.
disclosing something.
Yeah, and get information in writing from these management companies, because
Yeah. Not
they,
that you're gonna
they,
win.
not that you're winning, but
Not that it's gonna matter.
It's not.
it's really
Not
not
gonna
gonna,
matter.
it's not
They
gonna
make a
matter.
mistake.
We did have one where the management company, did agree to eat the difference,
Did they?
because they had it in writing in an email where they had said it was, $250 and it was really $500, so they ended up eating it.
But that's not always.
But that's what I would say. The management companies are terrible. I mean, they're just, they're the worst.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a situation, I saw a HOA disclosure, there are so many fees the current seller owed. And the seller make a note on the disclosure state that, the seller going to pay at the closing table.
Mhm.
So does that matter to the buyer?
If the seller hasn't been paying their dues and owes all kinds of fees, they have to pay it at closing.
Yeah, they won't be able to sell.
Yeah, so, unless they're upside down on the property in general, it shouldn't, it
So
really
as a shouldn't. buyer, don't have to worry all those things.
Mm-mm.
And out of all these forms we have, there are two that you should never, ever fill out. You fill out the contract, you fill out financing, all that kind of stuff. You never put your hand on
On
this
this
form
one or the seller's.
seller's property disclosure. You don't sit there
They're the
and
source
ask
of
the
arguments and
seller a
lawsuits.
question and you sit there and check the boxes. Never, ever, ever.
Don't take it back and make it pretty by typing it up.
No,
Just don't.
don't. Those two forms, don't ever touch.
And point out to them about the transfer and initiation fee, because we also get that all the time. Well, you never told me that that's what it is. And it is their responsibility to read these forms and fill it out, but it doesn't mean that they're not gonna blame you when they screw this up. We've seen a lot of agents eat that difference in the transfer and initiation fees just to keep their clients happy. So just talk to them ahead of time, tell them the high points in this. Tell them about the transfer and initiation fee. Okay. Any questions on that before we move off of it? We can talk about it. I can talk about
Yeah,
it.
that's 522. Well, of course, we hope you never have to use this form, but there are times.
Termination.
Okay? There's a unilateral notice to terminate, which is great. But we can't disperse earnest money without both buyer and seller agreeing. So that's why it's in two sections, and you have or in between buyer and seller, because only one person has to sign to terminate. But the second part has buyer and seller. Without those signatures, earnest money does not get released. even if it was during due diligence, doesn't matter.
So during due diligence, you know, the buyer has the right to terminate for any or no reason.
Yeah.
So they might initiate this.
Right, they might check buyer and buyer's right to terminate. Buyer would sign it, then go up, I'm sorry, Diane. Then proposed disbursement, you need to put in there, $2,000 to buyer Mr. Smith. Put the amount, put the person's name. That helps the office. Okay. Then buyer would sign that, and then hopefully the seller. We have sellers who get upset, even though they know the buyer has the right to terminate, they just refuse to sign it. So then we have to go through the 10-day letter process, which delays your buyer's return of earnest money that much longer.
And really understand that the unilateral notice to terminate is, it's for very specific things. It's
Yeah.
during due diligence, it is, you know, if they,
B would be if they
like
can't
financing
sell their
things.
house,
Yeah, yeah,
or loan is denied.
yep. And if you're using those, if you're using some sort of default or failed contingency, make sure you really understand, you know,
That you
that
have
you're
the
with,
right to.
that you have the right to, that you're within the proper timelines. Because people try to use this all the time after the timelines have already expired,
Right.
and then that's where the argument comes into play. And thankfully, those are at least easy ones
Yeah. But
to
we've,
dispute. But
yeah, but we've had it where a seller has checked C, following default under the agreement by buyer, because they heard the buyer wasn't gonna get their loan. Nothing's been sent,
right,
but they've heard the buyer can't qualify. Seller wants to terminate and get it back on the market. Seller can't do that until the buyer terminates. Seller doesn't have the right to. Very rarely does the seller have the right to terminate.
there's a couple of instances in the
Yeah.
contract, but I mean, they rarely come up.
Yeah.
Once your seller signs that agreement, they
For
are
instance,
pretty much
earnest
stuck with
money
it.
is not deposited on time.
But then we
Right.
have to go, there's processes for everything, which is why I say, read your purchase and sale agreement time and time again. Read it, read it, read it. It's got more information in there that is so helpful that you should know to be able to explain to your buyer and or seller what all this means. Because, you know, if the earnest money's not received, then notice has to be sent out to all parties. Buyer then has 3 business days to get the earnest money in. If they don't, then the seller can terminate 7 days thereafter.
Oh, so
It's
after,
all spelled out
It is.
in the purchase and sale.
okay, so after end of the earnest money period, and the seller is supposed to give the notice to the buyer, and the buyer has actual 3 days to turn
The office or the broker holding the money is
Yeah.
actually the one that sends the notice to the buyer and the seller. Everybody's put on notice.
Okay.
There's also, if, you know, it comes up occasionally that both parties want out of the contract
Yes.
for some reason. There is a
Mutual
form for that, mutual termination.
Yeah.
Don't see it a whole lot, but, you know,
There are times when
occasionally.
you should be using it.
Yes.
FI-19. Can you enlarge that?
Yeah, just know that this exists. I think it was Cynthia Pierce and I were trying to figure out a way to terminate an agreement. Everyone was in a survey issue had come back. It was outside all of the due diligence thing, but the seller had basically lied in their seller's disclosure about whether or not the property was in a flood zone, and like readily admitted it in an email, like, oh yeah, we knew that happened. So they decided to mutually terminate, and you know, Cynthia and I were like, oh, well, how should we write this up? And then I talked to you, and you're like, the mutual termination. So there is a form for everything, but a lot of these, if you don't use them often,
Yeah.
you forget that they exist. So, I mean, this is a good one just just to know about.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it used recently where a buyer just, I want to say they had a family emergency and they just couldn't close. They were going to have to take care of their parents or something. They went to the seller and said, we're so sorry, please let us out of this. We've got this going on, that going on. And that's what they used. And they actually agreed to split the earnest money.
I was just about to say, and a lot of times,
You can do that.
a lot of times there's a split of the earnest money, or, you know, like in the case with Cynthia's, the buyer's got all the money since there was fraud essentially on the part of the seller. But oftentimes, if they're, instead of going through the dispute process, if you can, and the 10-day letter and all that, if you can mutually
Everybody
agree to
can
terminate
agree.
and agree on a split of the earnest money, that's the easiest way to go.
Right. And
It's
every
a fast
now and then, the selling broker and listing broker gets compensated by the person that is wanting to default. It's not out of the question. It doesn't happen a lot. I'll warn you now. But every now and then.
How much do you calculate for that?
I'm trying to think, Luann, like I said, we don't see it often. I think each broker got like $5,000 for this person to get out.
Is it like a percentage though, or is it just?
It's usually a dollar amount.
I know, I mean, how would you determine $5,000 if it was like a $200,000 property?
I mean, I think it's just whatever the parties
It's whatever
agree to.
everybody can agree
Yeah.
on. It really is. There's no formula to it. But I don't see it filled out often.
Yeah, I wouldn't think people would
No.
want to pay anything.
But this was an unusual situation.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a good form to know about when you have a buyer that maybe doesn't have the unilateral right to terminate. Sometimes you can work it out this way.
Can I do property disclosure?
You can. Whatever you, this isn't in your packet either because Renee and I failed to communicate with one another.
I just like bringing up the seller's property disclosure because, first of all, there's no requirement that the seller fill this out. You will see often in FMLS a note that there will be no seller's property disclosure. Either the person hasn't lived in the property in years, they're selling the property for a deceased family member, so they're not going to fill it out. They don't have the knowledge of it. You know, if it's somebody who has been in the house for, 10 years, it's not unreasonable for the buyer to ask, hey, we'd like a property disclosure.
Well, and it's in the listing agreement that the seller agrees to fill one of these out. People miss that one. So,
And
the seller doesn't legally have to fill that out.
in the
Is that
listing
correct?
agreement, it says that he will provide one within 3 days of
Okay.
signing the listing. Now, if it's a case where they haven't lived in the house, you need to disclose, you need that in your listing agreement, that he's not gonna do it, and then it should also go in private remarks. It's a estate home or investment property. But a normal seller should not avoid this form.
Investment property would still house.
Yeah.
So, and here's the big thing about this. So this is all to the best of the seller's knowledge. This is not a set in stone, I swear,
That was my firstborn.
I swear with my firstborn that this is the condition of the house. Now what you want to do, you do not want to fill this out for them, but what you want to do is look over it.
Yeah.
If they mentioned at one point that the property was in a flood zone, but they didn't have it checked, you might want to ask them about that and say, hey, you mentioned that this had happened. Do you want to maybe amend this? Because you have told me about this. The other thing is, Georgia is a buyer beware state. The only time the buyer is not on hook for something is the HOA transfer and initiation fee. This shouldn't be a substitute for an inspection. The buyer, it's nice to give an overview of the property just so that they kind of know what they're looking at, but honestly, I mean, in my opinion, it's not really worth the paper that it's written on.
No,
because
it just gives you a general
it just gives
overview
you-
of the
yeah.
house. I mean,
it's nice to know,
the
you know,
fixtures list is good.
the fixtures list at the back is good.
Yeah.
You wanna go to that part
Yeah.
of it? So really, I think this is the most important part
It is.
of this form.
This is where most disputes happen.
Yeah. So the items that are checked stay with the property. If it's checked, the buyer gets that along with the property. This is the other one where you want your seller to fill it out, but I think you also, take this form and walk around the house with them and say, okay, so you don't want this chandelier. You don't want this mirror. This is the fridge that you intend to leave here. And this is the one that we're taking. Don't make sure that they're filling it out correctly so that it just saves headaches later on when they're fighting about. I mean, we see stuff all the time.
Ice maker. That's the
Ice
one I've
maker.
had so much fun with over the years. That means a freestanding ice maker. It's not the ice maker in the fridge. But we had a major dispute about 4 years ago over that. So what I'm saying is go over it with your seller and go over it with your buyer. Make sure there's not something on there that wasn't checked that they might want, like the light bulbs. And I've had a seller take light
Lights.
bulbs.
More than one.
Yeah.
And the plates, and the grates in the air conditioning vents.
Wow. Well, the mirrors.
This is like 30 years ago.
Ah,
But they were the brass ones back then. And he was my seller, and he took them all.
Yeah, and
Did he replace them? Did he replace them with something else?
No.
and that's the other
But back then
thing.
you didn't have to.
We see a lot of people pulling out their nests and
Yeah.
their Nest thermostats and their
Ring doorbells.
Ring doorbells. So
That's a new one.
look and see what that is. It is supposed to be, if they take it, they're supposed to replace it with something
item.
similar.
Back up top. Last line there. Come down.
Yeah.
Me?
There we go. No such item shall be removed unless it's broken or destroyed in such an event. There you go.
Yeah.
If not reasonably available, then it's got to be of equal quality and value or
Oh.
better.
Well, for example, if they have a nest, and
They-
I'm not gonna give you a new nest, but I'm gonna put a thermostat in, would that be considered equal value?
No.
No.
But what if you have a sign that shows?
If you, as long as you say, or you write it on there, there's plenty of room for explanations.
Right.
So if you're not leaving the nest,
nest
but you're
will not
gonna
stay with
replace it
property.
with this, then why?
If people are taking their nest and putting their old ones
Yeah,
back on.
yeah, that's exactly
So like the
what
old
they do.
original,
Turn the dial.
turn it out, yeah.
So, but this form, the fixtures are always.
Yeah, I mean, buyers and sellers both need to take a hard look at
Yeah,
this, because
they
a lot
do.
of buyers they don't really pay attention to this, and they just assume that things are staying with the house, and then have a rude awakening that when they get there and it's gone.
I mean, and if you're representing the seller, I've had sellers
in
who
there.
were taking certain bushes out of their yard because of sentimental value, which is great and fine, but they've got to disclose it. Because if a buyer comes to do their walkthrough and all of a sudden all the bushes are missing, there's a problem.
And we also run into occasionally, this is why it's important to go and do a final walkthrough. Sometimes the sellers do not intentionally take stuff that they're
Washers
supposed
and
to
dryers leave on
but
the trucks.
movers
Right.
just pack all that stuff up. They don't listen to instructions, so
Yeah.
make sure you're going and doing that final walkthrough to make sure that everything is as it should be in
And
the
also,
property.
right before closing, give your sellers a reminder, hey, remember, you're leaving the refrigerator, yes, you're leaving
The washer.
washer and dryer, make sure you have a tag on it for the movers, because they forget.
They do.
They just,
And movers just pick up things and move them.
Yeah.
They do. But, yeah.
Or they fill this out and they think, well, I'm not gonna take the fridge, so it's probably not gonna fit in the space anyways. They go find a new house, they forget that they have filled this out, that they're cleaning the fridge. new fridge happens to fit perfectly, so they think they get to take it with them. So you just gotta remind them.
Yeah.
And they can always, this can always be updated.
Could you do something like print
Yes.
that or suggest that you print that and put that on the door for them to show? I mean, I don't know.
There are, I do find that since everyone's filling these out electronically, they're just click, 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 click
Yeah.
through and not really paying attention. This is one where I would suggest you print out and give them a hard copy of it to take a look at.
Take it to the listing agreement
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah,
shortly
it should be part of your
thereafter.
package, sure. Yeah, you just asked about, gas logs. There- I've seen sellers take gas logs, so you gotta be careful. At least they did mirrors a little differently now. We changed that in January, so at least it's wall mirrors, hanging mirrors, because that was always a big issue. Else?
Any other questions
And-
on this one?
Yeah, on refrigerators, if there's several, more than one in the house,
Down at
be
the
sure to
bottom.
specify which one's staying, if you're leaving the basement refrigerator, but you're
Right.
taking the kitchen.
Multiple items right there.
Love the unused paint.
Unused paint, that's a biggie. If it's not checked, if you're representing the buyer, they may not want that paint, and it's expensive and pain to have somebody find someone to come get it. So I checked we were leaving unused paint, thank goodness, they were happy about it. Trying to think anything else that comes up a lot, it's really it.
I do screens for windows and stuff. I guess I put it under window drapery or the hardware, one of those
Let's
two.
see.
When, sometimes they take, it's strange, where else would that screen
Yeah,
fit? And
see,
you
I
take
think
'em.
we took screens off.
Yeah.
I don't see it. Shower head and sprayer.
Yeah,
Seller has this nice big rain shower thing,
switch
Yep.
them out.
and they'll switch them out on you. So, they're not supposed to, but they will. All right, what else? Y'all speak up.
Sanctuary.
What questions do
Hey,
you?
did we cover lead-based paint?
We did not.
Last time.
No.
We need to.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Got it. What do you want to cover?
The fact
Before or
that
after?
it's best practice to have your seller fill this out no matter when the property was built,
Correct.
because there could be lead-based painted furniture or
Mantle.
window
Mantle's
frames,
really big.
I mean, picture
Yeah.
frames, and just cover yourself.
There's
and,
no harm in disclosing.
and all you're saying is that generally they pick B, I mean the second one, that the seller has no knowledge, but the
A and B should both actually be checked, but the seller has no knowledge unless they do.
right, there you go.
The one I see get forgotten is number 3, where the buyer is either saying they've received the opportunity or they've waived the opportunity. And that's more important. The buyer is more important than the seller in this case.
Right.
And keep in mind, it is a federal requirement if the house is more than, or built before
1978.
78.
78 or before.
It's a federal requirement that this form be filled out, and it's, isn't it the seller has to have it in there at the time of listing.
It's supposed to.
The buyer can't sign it before the seller. The dates,
Right.
the dates
Right.
the date
Right.
has to be either on or after.
Right.
Right.
Right, so don't be the lazy listing agent that doesn't get this filled out. Because when the buyer's ready to make an offer and you haven't done this,
Yeah, fill it out at the list, when you're signing
Yeah.
your listing, or just, have your stack of papers that they're filling out alongside with that.
And on the purchase and sale, number 9 is the question, was this home built prior to 1978? Yes or no? I mean, it's a checkbox. Don't leave it blank. Because guess what? Then you get to do an amendment to answer that question. And that's my pet peeve, I will tell you, is not checking a box that clearly needs an answer. And that one is very important.
So if you're representing a buyer and you're buying a house built in 1971, but a lead-based paint has not been provided, you can't really fill one out, give to the buyer to fill out.
No, you need to just contact the listing agent and say
I
that
need a
seller has to do it. And make sure that the request is trackable in writing somewhere.
You can pull up a form and put the property address and send it back over.
Get them to sign,
Yes.
initial it, answer it.
I mean, you just can't fill it out. I mean,
You just
put
can't
everybody's name in there if you want, but
Yeah, you just can't check any boxes first. Because that's something that the EPA is very strict on. If they ever came in and audited it, you know, you just have to do the best you can if you're representing the buyer and can't get it from the seller, but you need to, you know, have records that you have made the request, that you have sent this over.
And how much are the fines?
$11,000 to you, to me, for everything wrong. One per $11,000 for not doing this right, $11,000 for that. And on and on and on.
And they do come in and audit.
And they do.
There's a reason why
Yeah.
if you are co-opting with, what is it, Harry Norman agent?
Yeah.
They
They almost
require,
always, 99.9%.
they have it on all of them.
They'll, even if the house was built in 2000. It's one of those disclosures, if the house wasn't built prior to 1978, what's the harm in having it? Then you've disclosed. I mean, you've given them the opportunity, you've given them the paperwork, the
Yeah,
brochures.
because it's not just the house, it's anything that could
portion.
be, any portion of the house.
Yeah.
So maybe the house was built in 1982, but they got some discount vinyl for a few years old, and all the vinyl has lead in it. Or they had, you know, repurposed blinds. A lot of the old blinds have lead in them. Or, you know, if it's a nicer house and they've special ordered, you know, mantles or
Barn doors.
something else that that contains
But how
lead.
does that really protect the seller? So they check off no known, no known, but there is. So how does that really protect them?
technically, they didn't know.
I mean,
It doesn't, I mean,
It really
it doesn't.
do
I mean, if a
anything.
buyer goes and gets, I mean, you can get people to come out and test specifically for lead. I don't think that's part of a normal inspection, but you know, if
they
the
can
buyer,
if they want.
yeah, but the buyer can come and get the property tested, and if there's something that contains lead, you know, they can certainly, and they find that during due diligence, they can request that the seller, you know, remove it, exchange it.
No, I
A lot of the old
understand.
bathtubs, like the old retro bathtubs, we replaced ours because it had lead in it, and our kids were dating.
No, I understand, but you're saying have it signed no matter what.
Mhm.
What does that really do for the seller? It doesn't do anything. Just by saying there's no known lead, right?
I mean, it doesn't protect the seller. I mean,
Yeah.
the protection is that, you know, you aren't going to get dinged by the EPA if they come through and audit it and they realize that, you know, it should have been filled out.
I mean, and I have seen where sellers said, yes, there is known lead.
Yeah.
And then they've done what they needed to
They've
do,
disclosed
but they
what they
knew
need
it.
to do.
A lot of people don't. They just automatically say, no, I don't have any reports, no, I don't have any knowledge. But then it's the buyer who can waive the opportunity or do the 10-day opportunity to have it evaluated.
Does that extend due diligence?
It is just for this. It would be just for this. If you had a 14-day due diligence, I mean, a 7-day due diligence,
You get 10 for
you
this.
still get 10 for lead-based paint, but nothing
Not
else.
in addition.
If
Yeah.
you click that box.
Yeah, if you click the box.
You're talking about the lead base, what about asbestos? Is there any kind of form for that?
You're on.
You're on your own process.
I mean,
No,
that's
that
a
one
big deal.
hasn't hit us yet.
Okay.
It might, but it hasn't.
There's a lot of stuff under floors.
And in the
Right
glue,
there,
and
floors are
linoleum
careful.
tiles and,
Oh, I'm sure,
yeah,
yeah.
and the glue.
There's a lot of asbestos in commercial buildings, more so than residential, from what my husband tells me, who's a commercial broker. So that's the only knowledge I have of it.
And it has to be pretty old, 25 or 1930s, most of that.
He's had some
Wherever it was
office buildings that
encapsulated,
he had to have the owner.
redo was encapsulated.
What else?
That's good.
What else do y'all want to see?
Good.
Stacy?
Thinking amendments.
Which one?
Do you want to say anything about amendment to address concerns?
I'm sorry, what?
Amendment to address concerns.
Okay.
Always put in lieu of repairs.
John Ellis.
What was that?
He was kidding. You don't use the verbiage in lieu of repairs because your mortgage lender is going to go, oh no, it's falling in. That's a red flag for
Well,
lenders.
and you know, that's probably what caused paragraph 12 to be in the conventional loan exhibit.
Got it.
That's the one about who's gonna pay for lender required.
Lender required repairs.
So,
We still
little
hate
quick tip, don't send the lender the inspection report.
Or
Don't
reference
do it. Or reference it.
directly, like
we've
don't
had-
put section 1.245.
We've had a lot of at closing conditions lately where the buyers have had to hold the lender harmless from anything, from repairs mentioned in the inspection report, or acknowledge that they have been completed, even if they haven't, then it's all harmless. We had funding on one that got held up because they had referenced repairs in the inspection report, and the underwriter wanted to see proof that those repairs had been made. We ended up getting out of it, and of course the underwriter was like out to lunch or something. So we ended up getting out of it by doing a hold harmless, but it, just don't reference
What about
that.
the amendments you put in after the inspection? The lender has to see them, right?
Correct. Yeah, you have to
Legally.
provide, show the lender and the closing attorney all amendments. That's why you watch your language.
But you said don't send the inspection.
Don't send the inspection report to the lender. They don't need to see that.
They don't want
They don't want to see it.
Or the
They don't-
attorney.
Or I don't want to see it either.
So I had one time where an agent, because I was the seller's agent, the buyer's agent put in a letter instead of a number for that purpose, because they said then they wouldn't have to,
That's,
if there were any others
that's
after,
lying.
they wouldn't have to send it over to the lender.
we are in a very catch-22 situation when it comes to this amendment, because legally, every amendment should be given to the lender. They're the ones loaning money on this property.
You're committing mortgage fraud.
It could be viewed that way.
That's what you could be.
But then you have the lender who says, I don't want to see it.
That's where you.
And that's,
Crap.
it has always been that way. I hate it.
Well, the lender or
But
the
isn't it,
loan?
Well, my response is have the underwriter send something in writing that
Yeah.
says
I don't see it. Yeah.
exactly what you'll never get.
Yeah.
but isn't that why we have amendment to address concerns, that's separate from amendments, right?
Well, it's not supposed to be. An amendment is
So
an
that could
amendment.
be 1 or 2, and you
Uh-huh.
can have 1, 2, 3 amendments. Those are totally separate.
No.
They're not.
All amendments. you
All
just
amendments
number them.
are no, I mean, it's not just because this is an amendment to address concerns and this is an amendment to change closing date. This is number one if you get it accepted.
Let's say you made an amendment before you got to this, so that'd be the amendment 1. This would still be amendment 1, right?
No.
That would be number two.
I've always done it.
I know.
I thought that's why we had 2
Uh-uh.
things.
No. An amendment is an amendment. Doesn't matter what it's called. You've amended the contract with something, but it's 1, 2. And if this is number 1, But then everybody says, well, let's just agree to increase the closing costs
Correct.
versus doing repairs.
And don't sign
Then
it.
that next amendment is number 1.
Because
Because
you
this
track
was
it.
never
Sign it.
accepted.
Never accept.
So you don't move on to number 2 until you have an executed
signed
number
one.
1.
That's right. That's right. And that's where if you're
And-
representing the seller at that particular point in time, you have to counter this back as to if you're gonna do that. Say all of a sudden you agree against, what I'm saying is, say you agree you're gonna give some money and then that's gonna be 1. Okay, then if they wanna do something else or whatever, and then something else comes back and you had to put something in there, but it has to be 2. It has to be in order, and you have to be able to send them all over.
Well, but, okay, to the scenario John's saying, what is the proper way to counter an amendment? Because we don't have a counter amendment.
You just
So you
send
just
over,
draft-
Write your own one up.
draft a new amendment 1.
And you
Yeah.
sign it from your side,
Okay.
and then you just don't.
I
and
wanted
you take
y'all
all
to
those-
say that out loud.
And you take all those numbers that are referenced in there, and you can just spell out as best you can exactly what they're trying to describe. If it takes you more pages, then so be it. But
That's why we have an additional page.
that's right. That's why you have to be more descriptive if it need be. Like GFCI, kitchen, master bath, and da.
Yeah.
You put that in there.
And then, this is my favorite form because it's just, it can be an
Anything.
amendment to anything. So the F701 is still my favorite because you can use it for most anything. You don't have to do an amendment to address concerns. You could actually say on here,
Closing costs.
HVAC to be serviced.
That's right. And closing costs to be.
Yeah.
X.
Yeah. Yeah, and even though there's an amendment to change the closing date, you know, if you're, I mean, you could throw all of it
Yeah,
in
you
just
could.
one, you know? If you're gonna push back the closing date, you're gonna repair the HVAC.
You're trying to do
and-
more than a couple of things.
Yeah,
Put it all
and
in
everyone
one.
agrees it,
Check number
yeah.
9 on
That, yeah, or leaving off your real estate license number on the purchase and sale agreement. That's been, there was a
Yeah.
fluke with, I don't know, FMLS or somebody
Yeah.
last week where all of a sudden,
Didn't appear.
I didn't see anybody's real estate license number on the contract. That's a violation with the real estate commission. And you can't really go back in after you're binding. You're not supposed to touch your binding contract. You have to amend it, to add your email, your license number, whatever the case may be.
And Lynn, you told me that, it's acceptable to abbreviate the Atlanta Realtors Association with capital A, capital R, capital A.
ARA, yeah.
Short and sweet, and that's,
That not being on there is not going to invalidate anything, but you should be proud that you are a member of the Realtor Association, in my opinion. So it should be
They
on
don't, if the date's not up there under the amendment number, but yet the signatures are electronically dated, is that, I know that's kind of picking it.
Can't you just put a box over there and put the date and not be?
Or go back later and hand.
Don't want no foul.
I don't know, really.
But if you go back later, you gotta
I'm okay with it,
redo the
but
whole
I don't know
form.
legally.
Well, if you change the,
Well,
if you don't.
I mean, I
change
think
the
if
date.
it's signed and the acceptance part is filled in, I don't think you can, I don't think it's a voidable form because somebody forgot to put the date in at top.
The reason I just did closed the sale, and they did not put the date in up at the top, but all the signatures were dated. So I went back up, and the other thing is the .lu.
It'll wipe out the signature.
And if he's creating a document, and I'm creating a document, then when they cross, I went in and printed it off, and I hand wrote the date
Yeah.
that, you know, and I hand wrote the date of the offer also, and then sent it back to him to be, you know, whatever bound and all this.
Right.
But
That's what
I just find it's kind of confusing, especially if they're sending amendments and we're sending amendments, and
Right.
if we initiate it, then they initiate it. We're having to coordinate .lu too, because It's not
Yeah,
allowing.
you can't speak to the tech issues.
In that situation, I'd download it, have it
That's always
separate.
our
I'd have it
disclaimer.
separate.
Create a PDF.
Yeah.
Great PDF,
Yeah.
Then
upload that,
you
But
can-
I've got
post on
duplicate
this
doc,
and
what
then
it
put
is,
the
I've got
little initial
duplicate, I've got
boxes
documents
Yeah.
might not
on
label
there.
that I've signed and my
so they
client
can initial
signed.
the authorization.
Then he's got documents in his
Send it back
documents
to
that have
him,
got my
about them to
you know,
initial.
Yeah.
almost, but I may not have all
That'd be
this.
one way to do
That'd
it.
be one
Just
way.
copy them and put it in yours.
Not that I don't think a date's gonna get anybody.
And
I just hand it.
the only other thing I'm seeing that I really would love people just to pay a little more attention is like on the seller's property disclosure and community association disclosure. Up at the top, the first paragraph, with an offer date of.
Blank.
Fill it in, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty please.
Wait a minute. Are you saying, which side are you talking about? The buyer, yeah.
Right, bless you.
And
Yeah, I believe-
technically, if you're
yeah.
a listing agent, you should make sure it's done too. It's
Yeah,
your
I mean, it
responsibility.
falls on both sides,
All
but
right.
usually the buyer's agent should be filling that in before they have their buyer sign and
Right.
acknowledge.
If they
that
don't,
got
You
it.
leave it blank when your seller fills it out. You fill it in when you represent the buyer. Every exhibit,
Has an
Or
offer,
just-
a place for an offer date.
yep.
And if they didn't, you could easily add the date and then put two little boxes up there and have your seller initially that. And then you have them.
I had a question on new construction on the, I mean, it never happens, it seems like, but on a construction, proposed closing dates on our floor, I'm rereading the ones we have, but we've already, it's gotten 2 postponements just for construction, wasn't completed, and everybody dreams up an idea why it was, but original one was in October, the second one now is March the 29th, and I know that they're probably not gonna meet that date. You could go along with them for another 14 days, but it would have to be a completed CEO occupancy by the 14th. And the factors, we really don't give much thought to that, but at the same time, I lost out on a fixed rate we had, and I lost out on a rates going up. Plus, you got such things as expenses of, a lot of people do in apartments.
Right.
If you live in
And
an
if you-
apartment, and they're not gonna let you do another third time.
Yeah.
Go around. So it's not unreasonable, I don't think, by a third time to request some form of reimbursement,
You can request all you want.
a pay down on it.
I don't know that you'll,
Get it, but also, I don't need to also accept the agreements when he sends it over to me.
you know, I mean,
At that time,
there
I
are
presume.
sellers, like REO properties where they'll put in there, if the closing's delayed, buyer agrees to pay a per diem.
Right. Yeah, when you're working with builders,
Yeah.
I mean, they give themselves so much leeway in the initial contract, to complete the property. I mean, I saw one that was, a year from proposed closing dates.
That's where we're at,
Yeah.
beyond the year date.
Yeah.
Could we, since we have been very expeditious with our time, speak to the buyer broker and listing agreement in terms of what do you see that's done wrong, left blank?
I see that it's not checked. You have the option in number 8, sorry. Independent contractor or employee of the broker. Your independent contractor.
Well, we don't give them a choice. We pre-select the independent contractor.
The agencies that we don't supply or don't provide are dual agency and sub-agency. Now, every now and then I'll see someone check, we don't do buyer agency. Well, that's what your buyer brokerage agreement is.
Yes, yeah.
And I've seen it, no seller agency on listing agreements, so you just have to think. You've got to have a specific start and end date in any buyer brokerage agreement or listing agreement. You can't say 6 months from end date is 6 months from, you know, whenever. It's gotta be a date.
And so, Lynn, it leads to the 48-hour rule of FMLS.
I
So-
think it's 72 now, but
Hallelujah. But you go on a listing appointment and you and the seller agree they need to do some sprucing up, and it's going to be 2 weeks, you know, before it's ready.
She's
well,
not gonna answer
I mean,
this the way you
soon.
want her to.
Well, I'll tell you what I've said.
Class.
So
okay.
I have said, you take a paper listing agreement with you.
Mhm.
You sign it and guesstimate the dates, you know, to the best of your ability, and you hold on to it until you are ready to, you know,
Amend the start
couple of
date.
days,
Mhm.
and then you upload it into Dotloop and, you know,
Oh, wow.
go on about your business. Now, because when I conferred with an MCA once upon a time, and they said, well, if you put it in Dotloop and the listing doesn't go live for 2 weeks, you've kind of officially notified the office, and the office is
You didn't-
bound to abide by FMLS's
That's
rules.
ours, the agreement.
Only if you submit it.
If I didn't. What if I
Okay,
didn't
now,
sit to
or
be
is,
looking at-
that's one of my questions, Diane, is it, if we haven't submitted it,
For review, could be
It's
just
draft.
talking about it.
then
I don't see it
nobody's
unless
looking
it's
at
sent
it.
to
See a
me,
lot
so.
of coming soon signs up there now.
Yeah, and they're not illegal, but if you have a signed listing agreement and you don't put it in FMLS within 72 hours, you're in violation. And if you want to take the risk of putting a coming soon sign without a listing agreement, you can. But that seller may or may not pay you a commission if somebody comes and knocks on the door. Because you don't have a signed listing agreement.
The other option is you could have them like sign it and then re-sign it.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's what you're gonna say.
And then, and you mentioned
You have
the
it signed,
amended
and
start
you can do
date.
it. I mean, here's
Yeah,
one way
which
you do it.
is
You can do it online.
not an approved
Don't
method with
submit,
FMLS certainly.
So right
And-
before
But you
go
can
live,
do it, but you can't
the
advertise it, you
date,
can't
kick
put a
their
sign
signatures out,
up, you
make
can
them
do
re-sign.
nothing.
Right.
You're just giving them
and
time,
that'll be the
but
latest
they're
copy, they'll
committed
never
to
know
it
that one.
as of today.
Right, and most of the time, you're not wanting to advertise, you're just wanting to get the repairs and
Right.
fix-ups.
And FMLS does have the option to put it in
Yes,
FMLS
and
for
charge-
14 days when a property's not ready to be shown, but you want to get the word out there, meaning a sign out or Facebook or whatever. So there is a way to do it,
I would
The
think that
right
would be
way.
the better way.
Do
the
you
right
rec-
way, yeah.
Do you
Load it.
recommend loading,
And then you make it.
loading in FMLS when you have the signed agreement?
Mhm,
It's not ready to show. You get a signed document,
mhm.
you put a sign up there, you put a coming soon, you go sit down, you get on FMLS, you save it, you start loading the features and all that kind of stuff and
Right.
save it as a partial. Does that have any bearing on it whatsoever?
That's not
No,
submitted yet.
I don't think you can, but I don't do FMLS.
I think
they give you a
Yeah, I mean,
They save it.
Where's this?
right, but
Yeah. thank you.
it's not,
I thought there was a function you could sit there and tell them that you can't go out, it doesn't
Oh,
spin
it
out.
said right here, allow internet access.
Yeah, so you
So
cut
you
that
can
off.
check that.
You can check no, that way it
Right.
won't go out to Zillow, it won't go out to
Allow
the internet.
address.
Right.
Only agents can see it.
Yeah.
It won't even go out to searches in FMLS, correct?
Correct. I mean, it's just kind of sitting there.
Wait, what does that say? Can you say
now,
that?
is this if you want to do that 14-day
Yes.
option?
And sometimes they'll let you do it longer. If you will just, like, if, they're not
Okay.
quite ready, talk to FMLS, send them an email, they'll work with you.
Yeah, you've got that thing up here that says conditions exist, see private remarks. Under private remarks, you can say,
Coming
it's
soon.
not currently.
Home will be ready to be shown.
Right, flooring being replaced.
Yeah,
You have-
something,
so you have
painting
that-
in
That
progress.
would start your 14-day window. Now, keep in mind though, that most agents ignore that.
Yeah.
And they will be on the phone with you going, can I get in, can I get in?
Mhm.
Because you might as well have that out.
Yeah, that's the reality,
Yeah.
of it.
Especially if you're in a hot neighborhood.
But if you put in private remarks that it's not quite ready, you have the right to
Access.
not let them in.
You put no, it won't go out.
Down here.
But it won't show up.
Okay.
Does it show up, okay, I don't, this is an FMLS question, or Diane Black's question, she might know. If you were to do this and you save it with it going no to internet, at that point, I know agents can see it, but if you had someone on a search, it's not gonna send that
Nobody else is
listing
gonna
to
see it outside
anyone.
of our MLS.
You have to be an FMLS to see this.
Correct.
Yeah.
You have to be an agent who
To
is
see it.
registered.
You'll know it's coming because you can see it, but you'll have to go physically look for it. You're not gonna get it on you couldn't set yourself on a search and get it that way, could you?
But it would be, it would have the conditions.
How about, maybe this is a Diane.
Probably
Stacy
this
question.
technology or FMLS.
This is,
Has anybody
that's
had-
why they're here
Has
together.
anybody had a problem where you're typing in a contract on Dotloop and you type like Exhibit A, and all of a sudden this whole
Yeah, what
thing
is
of
that?
steps pops
Drives
up?
me
That's
nuts.
our clauses that we put in.
Yeah, all those clauses, and I can't get them out of there. And then I've had to call
Well-
Dotloop to say, how do I get this? And like it populates in the box or in another.
You have to keep
thing.
typing. I mean, you can do A and then space and then hit enter. I mean, it'll do it. But what's happening is it's true. We thought we were being clever. We put these often used clauses, special snips in there so that you could just, do the first couple of words and it would pop in.
Yeah.
But then we didn't realize that for a lot of text fields, it's also still looking at those clauses. So
Yeah.
we're working with Dotloop to see how we can amend that so we can like limit it to like a certain field or something like that.
Yeah, it's really annoying.
It is annoying.
It is,
I know.
but not if you're trying to do that whole termite thing on special snips. It just costs right up.
Can you go back to the listing?
If we're going to talk about FMLS,
Yeah, wait, we need to let them go.
I'm sorry.
No, I have a good question for you both. Really important. Can you go back to the leasing agreement, please?
Oh.
Last question. The commission paid by buyer or seller, that section. Yes, because I got this situation. I know Lynn told me don't let it happen, but if for some reason it happened, I was told by other office, Keller Williams office, that if we don't cross, there is a section state that if the seller don't pay, the buyer should
That's
pay
on the
the
buyer
difference.
broker.
That's on the
Oh,
buyer.
Oh, I'm
Buyer
sorry.
brokerage agreement.
And I was told that if you don't cross that box, you wouldn't get paid if you sue the buyer.
If you left it blank, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, usually we
Then-
don't. They
then
left
you-
it blank.
If the buyer defaults, you're not getting anything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of must we have to cross that
Right.
box. Yes, exclusive
Yeah,
buyer.
Yep, she's working on it.
You're talking about right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually
Right,
we don't
this is
cross.
important, y'all.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
number 5,
Yeah.
blow it up.
There we go. Now, we know,
Don't leave B blank.
right,
Pick one or the other.
right. I mean, if you're only for some reason getting 2.5% commission on a listing that you've sold or you're selling, and you can ask the buyer to pay the difference. The seller's only offering 2.5. You can ask the buyer to pay the difference. Now, most people don't, which I never see. I wouldn't personally.
I wouldn't for 2.5, but 1% would be really kind of tough.
Yeah. But you need to answer it one way or the other, and you've got to have something filled in there, because if you leave it blank and that buyer defaults, then he owes us nothing. Absolutely nothing.
You ever seen the FMLS where the selling commission is going to be 6%?
Oh, yeah.
We know that's a mistake.
It's a mistake, and
Yeah,
everybody
we-
needs to
Realize that.
Or 30% instead of 3.
Everybody needs to know that's a mistake or question it, because mistakes happen, and y'all have made them, I've made them. You don't want to penalize somebody for a clerical error.
Now,
It's just not right.
if in FMLS it says 3% and then the listing agent comes back and they try to change it, is that?
That's why you get a copy of your FMLS printout. printout, you put it in your doc loop with your contract with your
Have it,
offer.
because they'll go back in and change.
Print an agent full the minute you go bind it. Print a copy and upload it to your loop.
Then she could fight,
Then then you got the evidence.
because they could go back and change it.
Thank you all for your
Thank
time
you.
today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Renee.
So this one here, changes the map.
All right, is your head spinning?
Thanks, Stephanie.
Control that.